Your leadership requires you to get to your why. So we all want to know, why are we here? What's my purpose? And there's so many different ways that the question why can sound. It can sound inquisitive. Why? It can sound curious. Why? It can sound like a complaint. Why? All the different ways that we ask the question why, it's really about getting to our purpose. And ultimately, what we're all wanting to know is, God, why am I here? And what is your pathway to your destiny? I want to give you a few thoughts about how to get to your why. Maybe you're a young leader and today you're trying to discern and figure out, what is my purpose and why am I here? Maybe you're a seasoned leader and you find yourself in a change of life. Something new has happened. There's been a pivot in your life and you're still trying to discover, what is my why? So here's the first thing of how you get to your why. You have to understand your makeup. Okay, so you need to have an honest evaluation of who you are, how you're wired, what your propensity is. Some of the things that can cause the greatest frustrations in all of us is when we think we want to do one thing, but the reality of it is that's really not how we're wired. Now, my example, when I was in college, I still love music, but I was in a band. And if I really could have charted my course, I would have been off and doing a band the rest of my life. Now, I was decent enough for a college band, but there was never going to be a professional reality for me in a band. Understanding that took a little bit of self-evaluation, and it took a lot of others helping me to understand that as well. When you're doing an honest evaluation of yourself, sometimes we're a little bit blinded and we need other people to speak into our life. You know, one of the most embarrassing things to watch is when somebody's on something like American Idol or America's Got Talent and they see themselves one way, and the sad thing is nobody has told them along the way, hey, you really can't sing, or hey, you really don't have that talent that you're trying to do. Now, I'm not trying to be critical of people, and there is actually, when we properly self-evaluate, we're honest with an evaluation of ourselves to understand our makeup, we can find the gap. Hey, here is what is required for what I want to do. Here is where I am today. How do I close that gap? And so we can, with proper evaluation, then know, how do we close that gap? But it starts with really understanding your makeup. The second thing is to understand your origin story. All right, that sort of sounds like I'm putting like superhero language to this, but hey, maybe you are a superhero. All right, so what is your origin story? What I mean by that is, what's your family of origin? When God chose you to come into this world, He chose a family, He chose circumstances. Some people have very challenging origin stories, and maybe you don't even know your original family, and you've had a very tough upbringing. Some people were brought into a different scenario where maybe the origin story was, I had a very healthy and strong family. But when we really look back and understand, what was I brought into, it helps us to get a picture of why we're here. Because our background, the circumstances of our life has absolutely shaped who we are. Now, you may look and go, man, it just really wasn't fair. What I was brought up in, and I look at what someone else was brought up in, it's just not fair. They had something else and I didn't have that. I know that this is a tough statement to say. We all probably understand the statement, but it has to sink in that just life isn't fair. There's not fairness across the board when it comes to what our origin story created for us or provided for us in some way. So the opportunity we have is to look back, reflect on our life and go, there's something about a purpose that God had for me. And He brought me into this world in a way. There were circumstances of my life that have shaped and molded who I am. And when I really look back and understand that and invite God to give me a perspective of what was that origin story really about, it helps to show what it was that He had a purpose in my life. So I really encourage you, sometimes people really want to reject their origin story. They want to reject the family they came from. And I understand that. There could be a lot of pain. But if you really properly assess, was there something in that that was growth? Something in that that shaped who I am? Then that'll go a long way for me to understand my why and ultimately understand the pathway that has had towards my destiny. The third thing is really dig deep and unpack your burden or your passion. Now, that doesn't always lead to something you can actually turn into a career. We might have a burden and a passion that just isn't going to equate to some sort of job. However, what you might do for a job might not actually be what your purpose is about, what your why is about. And when we really dig deep to understand what's a cause that really motivates me, gets me moving, it absolutely feels like part of my calling. What am I called to do? Well, when you really stop and unpack your burden and passion, your life might have guided you through some really smart decisions that led you to a place where you are today. But it really didn't connect with your passion, didn't connect with the burden that's really deep down in your heart, and ultimately a cause that really motivates you. So I want you to really think about what that is. What's something that is a cause that motivates me? Now, you might go, I don't know, I don't really have a ton of passion. I'd like to suggest that you can find the things that create a cause motivation in you by the things that really frustrate you. Now, I'm not talking about traffic and that kind of stuff. I'm talking about things in society that ultimately really frustrate you. And you may go, man, I'm realizing it frustrates me because there's a cause behind this that I really, really want to pursue. That's a way to find your passion that could ultimately lead to your why. The fourth thing is to assess your resources and your constraints. Again, part of your why is going to be based on what resources do I have to accomplish that. Now again, it may be once you assess your resources, you go, well, I see the gap between what's required to do what I'm passionate about versus what I have. And so you can close that gap by seeking other ways to increase your resources. But understanding what they are leads to, I might have constraints. Now, what we know about constraints is constraints can really drive creativity. They can drive a new way of thinking about things that ultimately can lead us to a why that is the destiny, that is what our life's purpose is about. But understanding the constraints, again, life isn't fair. Other people may not have the same constraints as you, but the constraints that are on you could be a motivation to drive you towards your destiny. The fifth thing is, and it's probably the most important, you got to pray. Listen, I hope you are a God-oriented Christ follower. That's the motivation of my leadership talks, will be that as a foundation and a base. But if you're the kind of person that does that on a Sunday and then you don't apply it the rest of your life, you're going to miss a key aspect of the why. What might God say to you? And when we pray and we listen, we don't just lob up our prayer requests, we listen. The next step in the listening is to obey. How do we pray? Listen to what God has to say and then obey. I think if you apply these 5 steps, you'll go a long way to getting to your why.